So you're with Dr. Sustainability. Today is my first podcast with my first guest. So the focus today is about understanding more about sustainability. And I could not think of anyone better to select in terms of my first guest. So we've got Dr. Ade Oyedijo. Ade, in terms of his focus right now, is operational management and supply chain management. He is a lecturer at the university, and also he has a keen interest in sustainability. So in terms of him, that's how he's situated in terms of the area. He also is, I would say, very well known in the community and in academia. And he's also the president of the Society of Black Academics, a society that's been growing in the last few years. And there's a big interest in this actual society long term, in terms of the actual opportunities, challenges that we're facing within academia and the Black community. And finally, one of the highlights I have about him, and I may have this wrong. So in terms of Ade, we have someone that has been well published, and published 3 times in 1 year, last year, by the World Economic Forum, in terms of the actual progression of Nigeria and where we're looking at in terms of sustainability and the challenges faced. Am I right with that?
Somewhat, yes.
Blimey, give us the rest of us a chance to get into there. Okay, so in terms of Ade, is it okay to call you Ade?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, so we'll keep it casual here. So in terms of Ade, it'd be nice for the listeners to learn more about you. Could you give me an overview about yourself? That was my perspective, what I found out when I read online about yourself.
Okay.
So tell me a bit more about you.
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, Osh, for having me on your podcast. It's really nice to know that I'm your first guest. So it's really ecstatic, and I find it a big privilege to be here to talk to you about sustainability, something that I know is of great importance to you as well as a person. So my name is Ade Oyedijo. Okay. So I'm originally from Nigeria, from a place called Ada in Osun State, although I was born and raised in a place called Ibadan.
Okay.
Ibadan is one of the largest cities in West Africa. Ibadan is in the western part of Nigeria. I was born and raised there. I grew up till I was 17 years, and I moved away, came to the UK for my undergrad at the University of Hertfordshire, down south. I went on to do my MSc, my master's in operations and supply chain management at Newcastle University. That's quite a long distance away from Hertfordshire. Then I stayed back in Newcastle for my PhD. My PhD was in the area of fairness. And I was looking at how, interorganizational relationships in the supply chain, how they could act more fairly. And in fact, while studying that, I saw some of the influences of fair practices, the bigger picture that it could have, not only on supply chains, but actually on the wider economy. So anyways, I finished that and I moved on to York St. John University. That was my first academic job, which I was quite lucky that I got that job in the 3rd year of my PhD. So I hadn't actually finished my PhD yet. Finished my PhD, moved on to Hull, and now I'm in Leicester. So that's a rough, overview.
You did a grand tour of the UK from the sounds of it.
Yes, I've been around. I've moved around cities. I've been around different parts of the UK.
How similar or different is that to Nigeria?
Oh, very different in every way. I guess I have two experiences. One is my experience as a student here in the UK, and one is my experience as a professional working in the academic community. But I would say there are 2 different spaces to be in at the same time, yes.
Could you give us some examples or a example?
Okay, so we could talk about the UK being maybe, of course, quite advanced in terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of even research, if you look at it from a research perspective. Anytime I go back to Nigeria or even any African country, I often feel there is still more that could be done. Of course, the talent is there, the potential is there, but those are key differences that I often see, and make me feel maybe there's more to do back in Africa.
So in terms of your work that obviously progressed from where you're talking about fairness, how did you fall into the idea of sustainability?
Very good. I didn't, very good question. When I think about fairness and my journey as a researcher that looks at the issues of fair practices in supply chains today. I didn't start off, from my PhD wanting to say, yes, I'm going to do fairness. I'm going to study an area. I think I remember I wanted to do something about decision making of practitioners in supply chains, and how their decisions influence, the performance of their supply chains. And I think at that time, my supervisor was saying, that seems to be a quite saturated area of study. You need to think deeper. You need to go into the literature and look for, more gaps, etc. So I think I was in the supervisory meeting one day, very discouraged, wanting to say, you know what, I'm tired of this, trying to find a suitable topic. And I had 3 supervisors. My second supervisor my first supervisor is Chinese. Second supervisor was also Chinese. He mentioned, why don't you do something on fairness? But the fairness he suggested to me, and this is where it becomes very interesting, was fairness from a mathematical perspective.
Okay.
So, with the subject fairness in the literature, it's been looked at from different angles. So there is a softer side of fairness, but there's also the other aspects where people consider fairness in contracts that are signed between 2 organizations, but also fairness with regards to pricing. And those pricing models they are mathematically determined, using mathematical models. So he wanted me to go through that route of, using mathematics to sort of find the right pricing between a retailer and sort of, the channel relationship. So I went on to read some mathematical books, and I was like, you know what, that's not for me. I'm not that type of person. And I think that was one thing I realized very early on in my PhD, my strengths and my weaknesses. But I went on to the softer side, trying to understand why do we need to act fairly? Not even in supply chains, but just as human beings. What does fair really mean? So it was that being inquisitive to understand what does fair really mean for individuals in supply chains, or acting as boundary spanners that are firm representatives. One firm is consisting of individuals that are looking after their own interests as individual firms. And what does fairness mean to those people in that firm who are in an exchange with another organization, either to source for materials or to supply something? And that was how the idea of fairness started. When I started this research 10 years ago, or maybe 13 years ago now, trust me, the interest in this topic has grown to the point that sometimes as a researcher, I wish I had done a lot more at that time when I was doing it. Maybe I would have been a bigger name now in the field.
You're pretty big right now.
No, not big.
So in terms of your research into fairness, when you did that for your PhD, what did you come across in terms of the data?
Wow, very good question. Came across a lot. First of all, I tried in my PhD to define what it is, because I remember that at the time when I was speaking to practitioners, I would, try to ask them, what is fairness? And what I discovered very early on in my PhD was what fairness meant to one party was always sort of different from what fairness meant to another party. So, for example, I would ask you, Osh, you are a supply chain manager or procurement manager at a company, a medium-sized company. You are probably maybe upstream the supply chain. What does fairness mean to you? And then if I ask that same question to a buyer further down the supply chain, it seemed that their interests are somewhat different, even though there could be a multi-tier sort of interaction between them. And I found that I think the differences in perceptions of fairness in terms of the definition and the meaning was a big issue in supply chains.
Yes.
But beyond that, I found that actually, fairness is actually very important.
I would say throughout your whole life is important.
Yes, it's a very important subject that I found supply chain practitioners often shy away from, particularly as a researcher. When you're asking people about fairness, they often feel, where is this going? What do you want to use with that information that you're asking? But I found it to be very useful, very significant, particularly significant in terms of how it influences relationship outcomes, but also behavioral outcomes. That, okay, when don't forget I mentioned that supply chains, I focus a lot on the people aspect, right? And when you look at the people aspect, how you perceive fairness could, in one way, shape or form, influence your decisions either to continue to trade with me or to then guard yourself in a way where you feel, you know what, we're going to continue to deal with these people, but we're going to be a bit more guarded in terms of how we accept certain terms of trade or certain things. And I felt those were very important behavioral types of outcomes that come out of that. But there are so many more other findings I've found over the years that maybe I'll be sharing later on in this podcast.
In terms of fairness, how did you then begin to connect that to sustainability?
Very good. I think, you know, when you look at sustainability, it's a very big term, you know, and personally as a
all-encompassing term, isn't it?
Yes, it's quite huge. You know, I think as somebody who's also come from Nigeria, I was born in Nigeria, I was raised in Nigeria, and when I think back about life in Africa, you know, as somebody who was living in Africa, sustainability is different from what a European would see as sustainability. You know, a European would probably see sustainability as, oh, we need to have climate change. We need to, you know, do this. We need to, but an African person looks at sustainability usually realistically from how do I put food on my table? You know, and in Africa, we deal a lot with poverty and unemployment. So when I talk about fairness, usually I sought to contribute to the discourse of sustainability. I try to look more towards what can we do as both individuals, but also as firms in the supply chain to improve that sustainability agenda from that fair practice perspective. And that includes the fact that between firms, there is an equitable distribution of rewards. So that means that a firm has contributed to the relationship. You have also contributed to the relationship. When it comes to sharing the benefits from that relationship, it is done equitably. But also that the procedures that guide that relationship in terms of the contracting, in terms of the fact that you have a voice, I have a voice as well, can really, you know, be managed in a way where it is fair. But also the interactions, and this is very, very important, where levels of politeness, respect, how information, communication between parties. And when I began to look at all these different issues, I felt, okay, this could contribute in a very little way towards that sustainability agenda. So I recognize that sustainability is a huge, I mean, if you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that's huge. But when you think about fairness, it fits into one of those sustainable development goals that could, even when you think about supply chains as global systems, the global value chain or the global supply chain. So fairness can play a huge role where a multinational corporation, for example, based in the UK, spanning or having suppliers in Africa can have a fairness orientation in how it deals with suppliers down there to hopefully reduce poverty, to have a social impact through fair behavior and fair practices that they exhibit.
I think that's a nice way of looking at it in terms of how we look at it in the UK and also in terms of Africa. That leads me to the question from your perspective. What is sustainability? What does it mean to you?
Whew, that's a good question. You know, I think...
Deep breath.
Yes, I think it's a very good question. As a researcher in recent years, particularly in the last few months, I would even say in the last month, because I've had to critique the idea of sustainability myself.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to write something on this topic again. I think I started to realize that actually sustainability to me, as somebody who is from Africa, as an African, right, is different from sustainability to me as a British person.
Okay.
I've got to be very honest. And I think we need to also start looking at things from that angle as well.
Do you want to put the two hats on, your African hat on, what does it mean to you, and your British hat on? Okay.
As somebody who I'm going to be in Africa, I'm going to be in Lagos in a week. Probably this time next week, I'll be in Lagos. And every time I land in
I'm jealous.
Oh, don't be jealous. No, it's for work.
Yeah.
But
is that what you told everyone?
No, I'm serious. It is actually for work. But every time I land in Nigeria and I drive through from maybe one city to another city, or even when you land at some of the cities, you would see that when we say sustainability oftentimes would mean community development. There's a huge emphasis on the fact that, you know, the local regions in many of the developing countries, they are still way behind in terms of education, for example. So you see where I'm going with the sustainability thing, right? In terms of, food, the fact that a 4-year-old kid literally has to go down the stream to go and fetch water. It doesn't have clean water. There's no clean water that passes from, a dam into their house, for example. Or they don't even have shelter. They're living in huts or and when we say sustainability, for me, as an African born and raised, I'm quite passionate about the fact that when I look at supply chains, what can supply chains do to do better? Particularly when you think about many of the global supply chains today, they extract a lot of raw materials and resources from many of these African countries, including Nigeria, right? So that is my sustainability.
You hear many stories for some of the big companies there in terms of exploitation, and in terms of taking, but not equally giving back in terms of the actual resources.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I want to write an article critiquing the. So I'm not writing on sustainability per se, but I'm looking at another idea called EDI.
Okay.
Equality, diversity, and inclusion. I'm trying to critique that idea. I think over the years we have seen EDI as equality. Let's treat everybody equally. Diversity. Let's be diverse, either with the people in the supply chains or in terms of roles, or diverse in terms of how we give equal opportunities to as many suppliers or as many supply chain participants as possible to come into the supply chain to boost rather innovation, knowledge sharing, etc. And inclusion, that you are just basically ensuring that you are including low suppliers from low economies or low and medium-sized economies. I think we don't look at that idea of EDI from those three different dimensions as what is a societal impact that supply chains can contribute to many of the developing economies that they see as critical to their upstream supply chain through equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. And a very good example, like one that I am very passionate about, I want to see something like this grow, is about how can supply chains or multinational corporations that have supply chains extended in Africa, for example, use their supply chains to create jobs.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I'm trying to understand, and I think those will really help in this whole discourse of sustainability and saying, okay, I've got an African art and a European art. My European art, for example, is that I've lived in the UK for 15 years.
15 years is a fair amount of time.
It's a fair amount of time. So I think I've been able to see quite well how the UK, I've gone through 15 winters, maybe 15 summers. The first time I came to the UK, my very first winter as an African Nigerian boy, and now as an African Nigerian man, because I've grown, right, over the last 15 years, there are two different winters, right? I mean, winter of 2024, this year, and winter of 2009, when I came here.
Yes.
Man, that was really, really, really cold at the time compared to now. I mean...
Do you think it's cold? Do you think you've climatized?
Can you really climatize?
You could get used to it. You prepare yourself for it.
Well, me, I can't get used to the cold weather.
Why?
Because I'm an African man. No African person gets used to the cold weather, particularly when you've lived in Africa for over 15 years.
Are you sure about that? But you've lived here for 15 years.
Well, I lived there for 17 years.
17. There you go.
So okay. So I've spent majority of my adult life here. Having said that, I think majority of the Africans that you would come across, if you ask them a question, would you prefer to go back to Africa and imagine that Africa is now the new UK, where you've got all this infrastructure, the good governance, etc., with the good weather in Africa, where it's 32 degrees almost all year round, or you prefer to stay in the UK? I can guarantee you 99.999% of many Africans will prefer to go back.
I think you could be right. Some of my own students are from Nigeria. They often say, I wish I could just go back just for the weather. And when they come into the university, they are layered up, and they still say they're cold.
Yes. So if I go back to the point about sustainability from my, let's say, British art, okay, or UK, somebody who's been here for quite a while, I would say that I've seen differences in terms of climate. Yeah, so our winters are somewhat different from what it used to be when I first came. And I know there are many people who've probably been here longer than me, including yourself, who can even say more. But also, if you've noticed, our summers are way hotter than what they used to be back in early 2000s or even 2009.
Can we call that climate change?
So this is where I'm going. Where now, from my UK art, I would say, well, I think we need to do more as a country to protect our climate. Okay, I'm getting somewhere. Okay. Now, when you look at it, let's go back to the global value chain. Yeah. And you think about the value chain system, the manufacturers in the value chain that actually convert those raw materials into finished goods. Many of those manufacturers are actually Western countries that are based in the West. Okay. And manufacture in the West, including China, that has proliferated in terms of manufacturing in probably the early 90s, etc. When we say climate change, and putting my UK hat on, you would see that actually Africa doesn't really contribute as much to that emission that we are seeing that is causing these changes in weather and flooding, etc. Yes. We are seeing more of it from activities in the West, which is why, from my UK hat on, as I round off this point, I would probably be saying that we need to do more in this part of the world to curb more on those manufacturing activities that are contributing to some of the extreme weathers that we are seeing today. Yeah.
So in terms of that, what you're actually saying is in the UK, we cause a lot of damage.
Yes, we do.
And we feel some of the damage, but perhaps other countries that don't contribute to the damage are feeling it, or maybe not able to recover from that. Is that what you're saying?
That's also another aspect, another conversation. But it links to this particular conversation in that I feel, and I've got to be very honest, is that many of the Western countries are always attending these big meetings and bringing about, this is our plan for this and this is our plan for that. But to be very honest, they are the ones who have done this damage in the first place, right? You know, so, or at least contributed enormously to this damage in the first instance. So then you're asking many of these developing countries who are still struggling with basic stuff to, come and contribute to climate. They don't even understand. That's not a priority.
How does it make you feel when you hear these kind of discussions, see these things on news, knowing the inequality in this discussion of climate change?
Sometimes I just laugh, and I think many knowledgeable people just laugh at it. I think many people that are doing research or are experts, either practitioners in this area, just feel it's a joke. If you go to Africa, how many manufacturing companies do we have situated in the continent of Africa? Right. When I say the continent, the biggest manufacturers in Africa are in South Africa as a country, Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana. You don't have many. I mean, when you calculate all the emissions that come from those countries, it's not up to just the UK.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So, yeah.
With the inequality there then, in terms of that level of inequality, we obviously have the agenda of sustainability, all-encompassing. Majority of the countries in the world are meeting annually in terms of the heads of states. Yeah. They're meeting annually.
In Davos just last week.
Things are being put on the table in terms of the Paris Agreement commitments. You have all these countries coming together, some on different playing fields in terms of Nigeria compared to the UK, but they're all expected to score.
Yeah.
So with this level of inequality, where are we heading? And I know you probably won't know the full answer, but you have some insight in terms of from your sort of field of speaking to people in Nigeria and other countries.
I think, although I wrote an article with my colleague in the US, which got...
was that published in the World Economic Forum?
Yes, which got...
Do you know what?
No.
How many more for the World Economic Forum?
No.
Give us a chance. Come on. 3 last year, you're going for 4 this year?
No. This year, I've not even had time.
Okay, okay.
But
we're only in January, you still got time.
Well, I think my priorities this year are more on my research papers to try and get them out of I've got too many in the pipeline that are just holding me back. So, but anyways, I wrote an article with my colleague last year on climate smart procurement, it's called, for Nigeria, And we suggested ways where the Nigerian government can improve climate, procurement, because majority of the Nigerian government contracts are actually, can be changed in a way where who you supply to, who carries out a particular function for the government is actually vetted to ensure that those people are actually sustainable or have a sustainable mindset, right? In how, for example, the type of materials they're using, the type of processes they're using, but also even with people, with regards to, the people systems that they have in place. After writing that article, and I just went on about trying to see how that article can have a huge or wider impact, I realized that Nigeria, particularly as a country, we are not contributing as much more to that damage that we are seeing as globally. Now, to try to answer your question with regards to what is it that, or where is it that we are going as a world? I don't know where we're going. That's the honest truth. But I know where we are going, in that if we don't really manage climate change, we will. Have you watched? There's a movie that came out last year, When They See Us. That's the name of the movie. I think everybody should watch that movie. That movie would really open people's minds to what a world post climate change crisis. And when I say climate change crisis, not all this minimal flooding we are saying. I mean proper climate change, serious, right? Where we are going, to answer your question, Osh, is that I think the Western, personally, and this is my own personal opinion, the Western countries need to really minimize going to the big platforms to show off agendas or etc. and start putting in the work of. They've attended, at least for the last 10 years, they've been attending all this COP and this Davos and all these things. It is time to begin to show that this is what we are doing and this is how we're going to continue doing this. Because until we do that, and bringing in less developed countries on board or forcing them to, that's not going to work. You have to walk the talk. You have to lead by example. And the only way to do that is to begin to change laws and begin to really action on some of the things that have been discussed over the years without really seeing any progress.
So with that in mind, what is the biggest challenge ahead?
I think the biggest challenge ahead is actually acceptance, getting people. Because it is one thing to have the plans, but it's actually another thing to implement those plans.
Execution.
And yes, to execute those plans, I see some of the plans and I say, how do you even execute these plans locally? Because you still have a lot of reluctance. People
Think
don't
global, act local.
Yes. There's a global agenda, but which is what even the World Economic Forum preaches, for example. But how is that global agenda actualized in individual countries is another thing. Fine, I know the European Union has its own European Union targets towards climate finance or climate change, etc. But how it would work in a local municipality is still another big issue. That you see it's got to feed from top to bottom. And I think that feeding from top to bottom is not done properly. And even when you think about the local acceptance, let's look at Leicester, for example. I know we've been building cycle lanes. I've seen people complain about the cycle lanes, for example, that what the hell is this? You see what I'm saying? Like, why do you have this there? I've seen local people, the council is trying to do something, but the local people are saying, well, that's not right, because they don't even understand what's there for. So we need to also educate. There's a local education that needs to go in where everybody feels we are together towards a common goal and vision for better climate preservation.
How important do you think that is?
I think it's very important.
Okay.
I think it's really important. Just the way I think, so the societal community development of many African countries through maybe the power of supply chains is also equally important. If you go to Africa, for example, many of the African countries, I keep saying Africa. Africa consists of several countries. I think 54 countries in Africa. So anytime I say Africa, please don't think of Africa as one country, right? Africa consists of several countries. But if you go back to the continent of Africa, the extremely high level of poverty, you just want to, you feel privileged, right? Look, what can I do to change this? And sometimes it could be through maybe what you write, how you write it, or,
That neatly takes me to the next question. What are you currently working on? Because I understand you want to contribute more to the agenda.
Yes.
What are you currently working on?
Good question. So I recently became or got appointed as a regional editor for Africa for the Journal of Supply Chain Management.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I serve on that role with a colleague, Samuel Fosuwamba in France, and another colleague, Shewat El Ibrahim in Egypt. With that role, I think our mission is to try to improve or increase rather the attention of supply chain management research in Africa, both for the journal, but also in terms of the literature and the field. So recently we've been trying to work on a societal impact article, and that article we're trying to see how can we advance supply chain management research in Africa. Through that, we're looking at what is supply chain management research in Africa looking like? How has it been researched, or how has research in this area been carried out in the past? And we're trying to then draw out specifics, the unique contextual issues in Africa, and hopefully then use that as a foundation for future studies, wanting to hopefully publish in JSCM to use that as a template or as a roadmap. But beyond that, I've been working very hard on a paper, which I was just working on before I came here. Over the years in supply chain research, we've looked at supply chain management, right?
Yeah.
But we've looked at, you see data coming from either the supplier side, and that's it. So they would say supply chain performance, etc., blah, blah, blah. And then when you look at the data only came from one party, a supplier's perspective. Yeah. Or you see some studies have done work on the buyer's perspective. And then later on, we moved on to buyer-supplier, where studies started doing, okay, we collected data from so buyers and their suppliers. In the last 10 years, I think some of this came from the work published by Carlos Mena, Thomas Choi, etc., a guy called Thomas Choi in Arizona State University. And they started looking at supply chains as a complex system where you have like a triadic network.
In essence, it is a network.
Yes, it is. It is a network. I know some people like Lisa Hellram in the past have also done some of this through works in industrial marketing management. They've looked at supply chains, as the holistic view, etc., etc. But anyways, with my work on fairness, so you don't forget, we were talking about fairness earlier on, and we were thinking about how fairness is a very complex, subjective issue, etc. With my work on fairness, I've been now trying to see how I can push that work more to this multi-tier level. So I'm working on a project at the moment that is titled Multi-Tier Supply Chains as a Loose Coupling System.
Okay. That does sound quite complex. Okay, if anyone's listening to this, that sounds quite complex just by loose coupling.
Yes.
Not even tight coupling.
No, as a loose coupling system.
Okay.
So it's doing my head in at the moment, this paper. I've been working on it for a long time. But in this paper, I'm trying to understand, when we talk about fairness, I think one of the reasons why we don't see fairness exhibited enough in supply chains is because of the fact that supply chains are actually loosely coupled.
Okay.
Loose in that every firm in a supply chain is an independent firm.
Yes.
So loose in that it is independent.
Yeah.
Coupled in that actually, though they are independent, but they come together either to share resources, to do one or two activities, supply chain related activities together to satisfy the requirements of the end consumer. Yeah. So let's break it down from that loose coupling lens. When we look at that lens and we begin to see loosely coupled systems, we see that actually maybe that's one of the reasons why multi-tier supply chains, when you think about fairness, they perceive fairness differently. When you think about the fact that you, as a supplier, and me as a buyer, we are independent firms. Your priorities are different from my priorities.
What if I challenge you on that?
Okay.
What if fairness is just an ideal state? It's an ideology that we'll never achieve?
Very good question. Very. I love it. Very good question. Yes, it's. Okay, let me finish this project first. So I'm looking at my research questions in this paper are, why do supply chain multi-tier firms, why do firms in multi-tier supply chains perceive fairness differently? So I found, of course, we have the power, the supply chain structure, And I even found something called firm level looseness.
Oh, okay.
Right? Looseness in that you have, I broke that down in terms of you have individuals in the firm, but you also have looseness I broke things down from that angle, from different angles. But also, I was at UK Parliament in 2022 as a speaker at the House of Commons, and through that event, I was also able to pick up some ideas that enabled me come up with some solutions to how fairness can be improved in multi-tier supply chains. But this is the project I'm working on at the moment. I'm hopefully targeting a top journal. Hopefully it gets accepted. I've not submitted it yet, so fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Now, going to your talk or to your perspective about fairness being maybe like a dream that can never be actualized. It's just some idealistic kind of concept. Fair enough. It could be. We could look at it that way. But my argument is that...
Okay.
My argument is that, what do we want? That's my argument. What do we want? When I say what do we want, what does the government want? What do the end consumers want? What do you want as a powerful Tesco or as a powerful Asda? What do I want as a farmer, a local farmer in Shropshire? I think when we begin to ask ourselves, what do we want? Let's put it on the table. Then we can begin to think, okay, is it an idealistic kind of fiction? Yeah? Is it fiction? Or is it fairness as a fiction? Maybe that's even a topic. But I think until we answer what do we want, we can't really know whether it's a fiction or not.
But is it what they want or what they will accept? A farmer will accept if PepsiCo comes in to negotiate. They may accept something, and that might be seen as, well, that was fair. They accepted it. They went along with it. No. So you're saying that's not fair?
No. So, it's deep. It's a very deep issue. Okay. Fairness in supply chains is beyond anybody. It's like when you go back to the ancient Greek or ancient Egyptian times.
Yes.
It's a subject that you got to go back to economics. Yeah. You got to go back to law and justice, to psychology, the way people behave, to really grasp the idea of fairness. What I'm doing at the supply chain level, it's not enough to cover fairness. You need to bring in psychology guys. Let's all come to really...
The legal guys will say, oh, we're with equity, come with clean hands.
Let's untangle this subject. But, when I say what do people want, I've been at top meetings at parliamentary level. I've gone out to workshops where all these huge stakeholders in supply chains come together. Everybody tells you, do we want to be fair? Trust me, everybody tells, even the farmers pointing fingers. You never do this. And the buyers or the retailers are like, oh, yeah. We are now having strategies to develop a fairer supply chain. I mean, go to NFU, National Union of Farmers. The UK government right now is conducting an inquiry on how to improve fairness in the food supply chain in the UK. Everybody wants to be fair. Trust me.
Everyone wants to be fair.
But in fact, it's good. Yeah. For the PLCs in the food supply chains, it's good for their shareholders to see that, look, this company, because the shareholders don't want to invest in a company that is seen to be having scandals here and there. So everybody wants to be fair. But it goes back to my previous question. So I don't think it's really a fiction per se. It is really about what do we want? If we all want to see a future where those farmers, for example, will not be kicked out of the market, will not be closing down because of the unfair practices of one other bigger, more powerful company, we need to act fairer. We need to think about fairness beyond, my company made X billion pounds sales or revenue, to the fact that, look, my company didn't make as much money, but we actually helped a farmer stay in business. And that is now our way of seeing wins. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? There's an orientation shift.
Is fairness profitable?
It is. It is profitable. How? It is profitable because of what
you just said. It's like the contrary there.
It is profitable because we have to be thinking of a sustainable world.
Okay.
So let's go back to
changing.
Let's go back to sustainability.
Okay.
Don't forget you are Dr. Sustainability. Okay. So and this is my argument in my research. This has always been and this will always be my argument, which is, if we want to see And I know somebody could probably watch this or listen to this and say, what is this guy saying? But my point is, if you want to see a more sustainable planet, and sustainability, in my argument, from my research, doesn't always have to be environmental, climate this, or, governance this. Sustainability can also be from a social viewpoint. If we want to contribute to a more sustainable world that is beyond just our environment or economic perspective, we have to think about the social angle. And this is where fairness comes in. That actually a buyer, a more profitable, a bigger company in the supply chain can say, look, we are also contributing to a sustainable world by acting fairly in our supply chains, in our relationship with the lesser powerful parties. Do you see what I'm saying? So it is more about a collective movement.
But would that mean consumers have to also move with it?
Yes. And I don't think consumers are moving with it enough. If they are, including myself, if we are all moving with it enough and we are demanding for companies to act fairer, just similar to the fair trade initiative that came up some years ago, we will see that many of the unfair activities will begin to change, because everybody, what is the supply chain for? Supply chain is to satisfy the requirements of the end consumer, either through products or services. So at the end of the day, if end consumers also say, look, we're going to boycott any company or any product that is not acting fairly, and consumers begin to do research and begin to say, okay, this company has been called out in the media. Okay, and there are social media campaigns. This is where Twitter or X, they call themselves now, or many other social media platforms become radical, change stuff. So my point is, as I probably round off this point, is that sustainability and fairness are closely linked, because we are not thinking about a sustainable world only by our environmental or economic initiatives, but also by our social initiatives. And those could come through behaviors of firms in the supply chain towards acting fairer, to save everybody, because if that farmer is still in existence, for example, that less powerful farmer, somebody can be employed. There is employment through that particular company. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And there is a continuous growth that we have.
With that in mind, obviously you've spoken about the buyer, the supplier, the consumer, but in terms of what's happening around the world, where you probably know quite a bit about it in terms of some of the supply chain, the fighting back in terms of retail.
Yep.
And in Bangladesh right now, we have a lot of strikes happening. We have issues in terms of delays in products coming to the UK and other countries. And employees within the supply chain are saying, well, we're not getting treated fair in terms of our treatment at work, how we're getting paid, what happens there. And many of these companies are supplying Western countries.
Yep.
What is your thought process in terms of fairness there?
It goes back to what we are saying, Osh. So everything, I think we really need to sit back. I sometimes I look at those types of cases and I feel, things might not change if we don't ask ourselves, what do we want?
Who are we?
Who are we? Where are we going?
Are we the consumers? Are we just general public?
Who are we? Where are we going? What do we want? Those questions are very important. Let's go back to all these things came up as a result of globalization. The fact that companies here in the UK or in the US, want to benefit from cheaper labor down in another country, but they've gone to those countries and used that capitalist or, profit-driven, price-driven perspective. And it's damaging people down there. I read a colleague of mine, though I don't know this lady personally, directly, but I respect her work a lot. She wrote a paper entitled, and I cite that paper in almost all my works, called A More Sustainable Supply Chain, published in the Harvard Business Review. Her name is Velina. I think she's currently at Arizona State University.
Yes, I know.
Okay, yes. And in her work, she was showcasing, the crazy activities that go on in multi-tier supply chains, but also collective ways maybe to address this particular crazy, activities. But in that work, you would see how, in warehouses, for example, how children are used, how I don't even want to say certain things. You have to go and read that article.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a way to promote it here on the podcast. But those cases, though, one would say that they are more of human resource type of cases, because in terms of fairness, there is also a heavy literature on associated with fairness that is from the perspective of human resource management.
Yes.
So I don't often, dip my hands into that literature because there's a lot of work, and I'm not an HR expert, even though you learn a lot from what they are doing. But I think it's still the same question, the same problems here, which is where do we want to go? What are we trying to do? If we really want to be sustainable, we cannot say, "Osh, this is where it really irritates me a lot." The same companies that are having suppliers down in Bangladesh and having all these human rights issues are the same companies that will go to Davos or go to the COP and be saying things like, "Oh, this is what we are. These are the sustainability initiatives we have in place." You see what I'm saying? So you can't have double standards. You cannot be doing excellently in environmental to say that, okay, your manufacturing, plants you've now upgraded all the systems to reduce emission levels, to manage the usage of water, etc. But your suppliers who are associated with your supply system that enables you get products, children at age 4 are part of those workers down there. You see what I'm saying? So there's the double standard.
It's quite concerning.
Yes, it is. It is concerning, and we need to. I think everybody has a role to play. Consumers also have a role to play. But you know what I feel? Many consumers don't know this.
I would tend to sort of agree with you to a point, and that's quite concerning, because if consumers don't know enough, are they making the right choices for the future?
Many consumers don't know. I don't know if we're going to be making the type of progress that some of us want to see until everybody's on board.
Yeah, a unified movement.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I would say companies want to make profit, but you can't make profit without consumers buying your product. Yeah. And if consumers will begin to dictate the terms of, okay, we are going to buy your product only if we see that you have certain, initiatives in place.
There is a bit of an eco movement coming through, in terms of people caring a bit, but is that enough?
It's not enough. I mean, do you know how many people die every day from, should I go to Africa? The supply chain systems in Africa and, the extraction of raw materials there, from cobalt to iron ore to cocoa in Ghana, in the Ivory Coast. I mean, I could name textile in North Africa. Do you know how many people die every day that we don't even see on the news?
No.
But we are here wearing all the H&Ms and the Ralph Lauren and co. But people are dying. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? So.
But really, that's the cost of fashion. That's the cost of our industry. That's the real cost that when we think about actually people dying in supply chains. It's
sad. That's what I can say. It's sad. But I think it would change over time. I think we are getting to a consumer base, and I use the word base intentionally, that moves beyond the Gen Z now to more of the the millennials. Yeah. And I think the people coming after the millennials will not have some of these things that are going on. And that is maybe 2 generations from now we will begin to see. And I'm probably concerned about that we have to wait. Yeah. But I think things will change. It's just a matter of time. Hopefully, it's not too late.
Okay. So I've got a few other questions that were lined up. So in terms of yourself, was keeping with the idea of fairness, equality, sustainability, that ties in with your work with the Society of Black Academics quite well. Yeah. In terms of the Society of Black Academics, you are the president of the society. Yeah. They have had the 3rd annual conference, which I attended.
Well, I remember that.
I would say I was very privileged to go to it. When I went there, I wasn't sure what to expect, if I'm quite honest. I felt like I arrived home to people that are willing to be very open-minded, listen, and also sort of share their struggles and also opportunities. So that's what I took from it. Yeah. It'd be nice to know a bit more about how you came about setting up that society. So if we start, how did this Society of Black Academics come about originally?
Very good question. And I like the way you've sort of attached my research interest in a way to the Society of Black Academics. My research being sustainable, oriented in nature, it links a lot to what I do with the SBA, wanting to see change,
Yes.
and that change particularly from the people perspective or the people dimension. So the Society of Black Academics, I think, started in 2021. This was, don't forget I said I came here to the UK at a very young age to do my undergrad, went on to do my master's, my PhD. I studied for 10 years, non-stop.
Sounds painful.
I remember with horror.
Okay.
I remember that experience. It was not an easy experience. I think I'm not sure if I would do it again, but it was a very crazy experience. But
Yes.
my point is, over the 10 years period, I remember that while studying as an undergrad student here in the UK, as a master's student, and as a PhD student so my undergrad was at the post-1992 university. My master's and PhD were at the Russell Group University. And I could see that, look, we don't have many professors in the UK. It's always been a question to me. So I graduated, I finished, I started my career, and I would always think sometimes, where do I go next? Who do I turn to if I do need advice? And not as if you can't get advice. Advice is freely available out there, even if you go on Google. But it is not the same as if somebody who is like you, who has been through certain challenges that only you can go through.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? When they tell you certain things, it really shifts your mind. There's power in that. So I had a phone call with a senior colleague of mine at the time in Edinburgh, and he was just asking me questions about my life and my time at Hull, where I was before. And while sharing that, and I began to ask him some of the questions that had always been on my mind as a young Black academic in the UK. And he started telling me his experiences, some of them very negative, And I felt, wow, if I didn't ask you these questions, if I was not on this phone call with you, I'd always seen you as I'd always seen your profile, but I would have never known that you went through these challenges. Would you mind if we shared this out in a wider audience? And he was like, why not? Let's do that. And I would, give you a platform to do so, because he had a research center, I think, or business cluster at Edinburgh at the time. And that was how SBA started.
Okay.
SBA started as an initiative or a platform for Black academics in the UK to come together to share their experiences, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, because everybody can learn from that, but also to provide future words of encouragement that could help other people who are probably struggling somewhere, in maybe one little way or form, to progress their career. It's more about career development, but in a very safe, very open-minded sort of setting.
Okay. So with that in mind, so naturally, obviously, if you're talking about membership, you're talking about Black academics.
Yeah.
So I'm Asian. So in terms of membership, how inclusive or exclusive are you?
Oh, we are very inclusive. I'm really glad you came, and I'm glad you found it comfortable to be in. We, like I said, we started as a Society of Black Academics, and we were primarily associating ourselves with academics in the UK. But many of our events, you find people from Australia, from Nigeria, from Egypt, from Morocco. I think we had people even from South Africa, from the US, Canada joining. So what am I saying is that although it's an organization that I set up based in the UK, even if I'm no longer in the UK, even if I move on to somewhere else, it's always going to be a UK-based organization that is also international and has members and membership from different parts of the world. And even if you're not Black, you are welcome. We always have speakers that are not Black speakers, because again, that's also one of the ways we can actually
I think the
achieve
nice
our goal.
thing that I found was, though I don't identify myself as a Black academic, some of the challenges other communities, for example, Asian academics, Asian women academics are quite similar.
Yeah.
So you're able to sort of bring together some of the challenges and opportunities and feel safe to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And I also like the way that people are quite open about, like, how do you make improvements? Have you also faced this?
Yeah.
And knowing it's a safe space, I think if you don't feel it's a safe space, it's hard to talk.
Yeah.
And which makes it even bigger issue long term.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
an interesting thing.
Talking of Asian, one of the speakers from our last conference, her name is Noreen Ashid. She's Indian. She's based in, I think, Dundee, now in Strathclyde in Glasgow. We have these types of speakers. Although we are called Society of Black Academics, but our members are not restricted to Black people. We have people that are of different...
I would say the way I saw it when I attended that day, and I was blown away because I do get invited to a range of events throughout the year.
Yeah.
And that was one of many events. So when I went there, I was blown away. I would say that was probably my highlight event for the year.
Wow.
And I was just taken away how comfortable it felt, how people genuinely want to make a difference to people's lives. And I think you could see through when people don't want to and when people do want to.
Yeah.
I think that was nice to see. So if there's somebody just say watching or listening today and they're questioning whether to get membership to the society, what would your advice be?
I would say knowledge is power, community. If we want to make progress, what is progress? Progress is just being a better people, being at a position that is better than where we are now.
Yes.
If we want to do that, you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
My sister, my brother, whoever you are listening to me, you've got to be part of a community of people. You've got to engage with others. You have to have a network. Trust me, a network is very powerful. I'll tell you just 2 instances. If you're an academic in the UK and you want to get promotion to senior leadership position, you need to have a network. If you don't have a network, you can't have that because who would vet you?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? But if you are part of a network, people know you, you know them, you engage. When it's time to say, okay, she wants to apply for professorship or readership or associate professorship, you will need to provide references, at least 3 references at the institutional level, but also external references as well. Who would give you those references? People that don't know you will give you references? How? You see what I'm saying? So that is just one of the many advantages. I think it's also good just to come and meet people. You never know who's doing research that is close to yours. You never know who is probably not even doing research close to yours, but could work with you on something that is very relevant to your career progression. So I would say we always encourage members to join. We have student membership if you're a student, either at master level or PhD level. We have membership for academics, full-time or part-time academics. We have membership for heads of schools, or if you are more of a senior leader that is looking after people, and maybe you are looking after Black people in your team, be a member. Come to our events. See what we do. See what we talk about. Maybe the perspectives you gain from those events or experiences could maybe make you a better leader in your organization to manage people of Black or minority ethnic communities.
Fantastic. That was one hell of a sales pitch. Okay. To round up today, obviously we've gone through quite a lot in terms of who you are, what you're currently doing in the UK, in terms of fairness, sustainability, and also discuss the Society of Black Academics. So that's rounding us up for today. There's one final question I do have for you. So a bit like other podcasts, what I'm doing is introducing a question that you leave for the next guest.
Okay.
So can you think of a question that you'd like to leave for the next guest, linked to sustainability, because that's the theme here, and I'll keep that for the next guest and we'll pass it on question by question. So if you could leave a question, what question would it be?
That's a very good question.
I like that.
Yeah, and I want it to be a very important question. I think my
we might have the Prime Minister next time.
That would be nice. That would be nice. I think my next question for the next guest would be about societal impact. It's been on my mind for a while. Okay. If we are thinking about sustainability, how can we be sustainable without societal impact?
Okay.
Without impacting our society? Societal impact can come at different levels. So maybe that's something that you could throw on to the next guest to ask about sustainability and its relationship with societal impact. Let's maybe untangle that a little bit to see what does that really mean and what can we take from that type of topic.
Wonderful. That's a very interesting question to ask.
Yes.
Okay, hopefully that guest is able to answer that question. Okay, I think that brings me to a conclusion for this podcast. I just want to say a big thank you.
Thank you too.
For being my first guest and also being open-minded in terms of sharing your own insights and where you are currently in terms of your own work and what you'd like to see for the future. I think sometimes people are quite hesitant to share, but I think let's put it this way. It'd be fair to say you've been quite open-minded in terms of sharing your ideas and what you'd like to see in the future. And hopefully we get there in time. And hopefully it's not 2 generations.
Hopefully not.
Okay. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave?
No. Well, I think one thing I've discovered as a researcher, and this is somebody who's now been working on sustainability research, particularly fairness I've been working on fairness for 10 years now. Even though you might not believe that, but I've devoted a lot of my time and my life to this topic. I think, one final word I would like to leave is that when we are thinking of fairness, it doesn't always have to be about supply chains alone. It doesn't have to be from business to business transactions. I think fairness actually starts with the person, the human being, because no business is managed by a robot or a computer or a machine. So as human beings, whoever's listening to this podcast, please always ensure that you treat people fairly, in your day-to-day life. I think that is the beginning. That is the starting point before we begin to see any impact come into fruition at the business or firm level. That's what I would say.
Fantastic. I think that's a nice, deep ending, I'd say overall. Thank you for your contribution today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you.